great to see a bunch of you. It's great to have so many people on the call. I think Arthur Fliegelman, you're JJ's dad, right? So it's nice that there's a Penn Hill connection. JJ was an active student, and I remember Arthur from Family Weekend and stuff. Yeah, you want to unmute and say something?
My wife and I were also students at Penn. He's second generation.
Ah, there we go. That's a typical Penn family. So what I'd like to do, we have about 50 minutes today, and it looks like there are a ton of folks who don't have their videos on. I don't want to put pressure on anyone, but what I was hoping to do was to open actually with some discussion and actually to break folks into some chavruta pairs. David, is that doable even if folks aren't on their, if the cameras aren't on?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll try it out. If it's not working, if people want to listen more passively, we'll pivot and make that work as well. But the question that we're going to look at today, and I hope this will be like fun. I mean, 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday is a lower energy time of the day, but I hope we're going to get everyone's energy up. I hope we're going to make people uncomfortable a little bit, and we're going to look at some amazing text. And I think it's the perfect topic. Do I believe in God is the wrong question, or you could even say it's a silly question. And especially headed into Pesach, we're about, next week, we're going to read the Haggadah. I guess this week already. We're going to read the Haggadah. There's all this anthropomorphic language, these images of God performing miracles, taking the children of Israel out of Egypt with a strong hand and outstretched arm. And my sense is that many of us, certainly, this is where I'm coming from, don't necessarily feel deeply inspired or connected or even believe in these notions, these kind of very literal notions of God that are depicted sometimes in the Torah or in the Siddur or different holidays. And so the question is, are there other authentic ideas encapsulated or hinted in our tradition that might make more sense for us in a contemporary moment? And so the first thing I would love to ask folks to do is just in the chat box. The first question I want to ask is, have there been moments in your life where you feel connected or tuned in to God? And to put a couple words in the chat to describe that, and again, it could be, if you're like a super Jew, that could be at shul. For many of us, it's not at shul, but there's, people talk about the birth of their kids. Anything is fair game. And I promise you, we don't know each other that well after 6 minutes, but there, as a rabbi and an educator, there's almost nothing you could say Jewishly that will offend me. And so please just be really blunt. And I think it is a reasonable answer to say, I don't feel connected. It's never worked for me. And you can still be a good, proud Jew. But so let's take a few seconds and I'll read them out as they come in. So Lori said at the Kotel, Lana said in nature. There's a lot of people, I think, who find beauty and connection to God and spirituality in nature. Kotel, I feel like it's a 50-50 split. People either really feel it or really don't. What else? Other folks? Okay, so let me ask, in community, great. Is there birth of children and grandchildren where I'm tapped on the shoulder to make a good, safe choice? I love that. Limud UK, so we got a Limud fan who feels it at Limud. In shul at 3 different times, but all troubled about something. There have been thousands of times in shul where you didn't feel it, right? Private moments of prayer, looking into the eyes of grandchildren. I think that's an amazing, there's like 2 pieces to that, which is really beautiful. One is the connection to grandchildren, but there is something about looking in the eyes of someone, feeling deeply connected to another human being can often do it for you. Singing Debbie Friedman, great. Okay. At the ocean, right? There's a nature piece. And let me ask one other question here. So just what I'd love you to do is to chat like, let's say true or false, okay? So here's the question. The question is, I believe in a God that is anthropomorphic. I believe there is like a personal God in the sky looking out for me that can perform miracles on earth. So just type true or false for you, not existentially. No, okay, great. And no one wants to say yes. We're going to look for one yes. Great. Okay, so we are all good postmodern existentialists together. Oh, we got one true bracha. Thank you. We got one supernaturalist in the group. And Ruth Shapiro. Great. Okay, good. I wish, Ruth and bracha, that was how I could connect to God in a very direct way. There was a rabbi who worked at Penn Hillel for many years, and his image of God was Hagrid, like this big giant, from Harry Potter stories, who could give you a hug. Like when he was having a bad day, he felt God's arms, like literally giving him a hug. And I was always jealous of that kind of connection. Okay, good. So let me ask, I want to ask one other question, and we're going to get crazy here in terms of Zoom facilitation. But what I would love folks to do is to unmute, and we're actually going to talk to each other for a moment before we dive into the text. And I just want to ask, like, for people to verbally communicate, what are some of the classic depictions of God, of God's presence, of God's appearances in the Bible or in the Siddur? Common depictions of God that show up throughout Jewish tradition. And I would love you just unmute and share as many as we can think of.
I'm just giving
Fire.
you permission to unmute.
Fire.
We said fire. Was that Nancy? Okay, so we got fire. That's a classic one, right? Fire is a depiction of God at Mount Sinai. There's the Ananei HaKavod, this pillar of fire that comes down to protect them from the Israelites from the Egyptians, and while they were wandering the desert, would help guide their way at night. There's other great stories about fire we'll talk about later on. Of God, yeah, Janet, go ahead.
There's the hand, of course, the hand of God.
Yeah, say a little bit more.
There's the mouth of God.
Yeah.
There's the feelings of God. God doesn't seek vengeance.
Right, and I thought you were going to say something different, which is God. What Heschel's idea is that God is full of pathos. God gets angry. God gets jealous.
Yeah.
God falls in love with people. Right? It's not clear what King David or Abraham did, but God loves them and chooses them and makes a covenant with them without any conditions attached. Great. Any other ones? Yes, Bracha.
God often communicates through a messenger.
Good, through a messenger. And what's a simple word for those messengers sometimes? I guess there's two words that come up.
Prophets.
Prophets and angels, right? A lot of those messengers that are sent are angels that come and call out to Abraham saying, don't kill Isaac, right? That kind of thing. Mindy.
I think sometimes he's jealous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good, and that's a good Pesach one, right? The real reason that God hardens, right, or at least this is the plain meaning reason of why God hardens Pharaoh's heart, is so that God gets a chance to show off all of God's power, so the whole world will know how powerful God is. Great.
Forgiving.
Lori, what were you saying in St. Louis?
Forgiving.
Forgiving, yes, good, thank you. That's an important one. God's forgiving, compassionate. There was one other person who spoke.
A warrior with a strong right hand.
Yes, very much so a warrior. God goes out and wins battles for us, right? Good.
That still small
Oh.
voice.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Good.
Yes,
Who's the
we have
first
to
person?
we have to look for God. It's that still small voice.
Still small voice. Great. So that is actually one of the pieces that we're going to look at really deeply. Okay. Vengeful. Yes. Okay, good. Good. So we're going to play with this as we go, because the text that we're going to look at, in the main piece we're going to look at, is from 1 Kings, which is relatively late in the narrative section of the Tanakh, of the Bible. And both like from an internal biblical perspective, it's late, right? It's late in the story, but it's also late chronologically from an academic perspective when it was edited or redacted. And it's a story about the prophet Elijah. And it ends, I think Harvey maybe was the person who said this, with this image of God as a still small voice. And so we're gonna break people up into breakout rooms. Oh, so David just pasted in the chat the text, so you can click on that. There's a PDF. And what we're gonna do in Chavruta, in paired study in your breakout room, is to read this text in 1 Kings. And we're going to play like a little game. There's something called intertestamental midrash. or intertextuality. And that's when you read a text and you're trying to see what are the allusions that show up in a text. So classic examples of this would be Moses leads the children of Israel almost to the through the Sea of Reeds, through the Red Sea, and there's a crossing of the Sea of Reeds. So if you wanted to inaugurate the next in line, Joshua, to be like the new Moses, what would you have him do? There'd be a great motif to show that he's just like Moses. He'd have to cross some body of water. And the depiction in the book of Joshua of crossing the Jordan River makes it seem like it's crossing of the Red Sea. That's like an intra-testamental midrash. Within the same Bible, one source is interpreting another source. And then there's intra-testamental, like for example, the Christian Bible will reinterpret the Hebrew Bible. So if you want it, how old was Sarah when she gave birth to Yitzchak, to Isaac? I can't see people mouthing it, right? She was 90 years old. So, and she was, if you wanted to to supersede a woman who gave birth at 90, what would be even more miraculous than a woman who gave birth at 90?
A virgin.
Virgin birth, right. If Abraham is willing to take his son up the mountain carrying the wood on his back, but in the end doesn't go through with the sacrifice, if you wanted to one up that, what would you do? You'd march your son up that exact same mountain carrying wood on his back, and that'd be Jesus, and actually sacrifice him, right? So that's intra-testamental midrash. So the game I want you to play as you read this text is, what are the biblical allusions that this text is conjuring? Anything you can think of. How is it riffing off? And we have to imagine that if this was all given by God and this is all divine text, so it's aware of all of the other texts in the Bible. And if you believe it from an academic standpoint, this is just a later text, then the people redacting this text know of these other sources. So anything in the Jewish Bible that's playing off it, that's what we're going to play with. So we're going to take, I would say, about 10 minutes in Chavruta to play with this. And again, the whole question I'm trying to play with is, what are the classic images of God that are given to us in Jewish text, like the Bible, like the Siddur? And how does this turn it all on its head? Right? So there's two questions we're going to play with. First is any biblical allusion you can find. And the second is, how does this turn everything we think we know about God on its head? Good? Okay. You can play in Hebrew or English or both. We'll do it in English when we come back so everyone can follow, but we can reference the Hebrew as we need. And David, I'll just ask you to put people in two-person breakout room. Back, everyone. I hope that Chavruta learning was good. I am going to ask if you're not in a noisy place, to ask folks to unmute. And then maybe just raise your hand so folks don't talk over each other. But let's try to create a community as close as possible to like we're actually in a room together. And this is going to be really playful. I mean, we've got about, I want to spend at least 10 minutes on this before we try to plug it all in. But there's so much fun stuff that comes out of this text. So actually, what I would love to do is can I ask someone to read? And then if you see a biblical allusion, raise your hand, we'll stop the person reading, or I'll ask you to pause. But so I don't know, I'm going to pick on someone. Nancy, do you mind if I pick on you to read in the English?
Oh, I would love to. Thank you so much. I actually have a vision problem, but thank you so much for the offer. Ordinarily, I would love to.
Okay, great. Well, anyone else willing to volunteer? Okay, Bracha, great. Go ahead.
Okay. Do I believe in God is the wrong question, shifting our focus from God to the godly. And this is from Kings 1:19, 3-12. Frightened, he fled at once for his life. He came to Beersheba.
Thank you, Bracha. I'm going to do that a lot, so just hang with me. Yes, Janet, did you see an allusion there?
David fled for his life from Saul.
Yes.
And Jacob fled Jacob didn't flee. Jacob
He fled.
went, but he went a little more slowly. He didn't. But maybe Jacob too.
There's one other.
Well, Jacob told to flee.
Mindy, yeah, you want to unmute though.
Also fled.
Meryl,
Or she was sent away.
who was?
Hagar.
Hagar was cast out. Good, but Moses
Moshe fled.
Moses.
as a baby, right? The
right.
first introduction to Moshe is that his life is being threatened by by Pharaoh. This is also an allusion. Jesus, in the same way, to be prefigured for Moses, is also threatened, right? Okay, so right off the bat, if you've got your biblical reading glasses on, there's alarm bells going off. Something is about to happen.
I think it's when Moses also, I think of when Moses flees also when he finds out that his killing the Egyptian is known in the community.
Right. So that's great. So he also, right, there's like these essential moment in what makes Moses Moses, where he has to flee in order for this next stage of his life to reveal itself. Good. Okay, Bracha, keep reading for us.
Okay. He came to Beersheba, which is in Judah, and left his servant there. He
Oh,
himself.
Abraham, after the Akedah, goes to Beersheba.
Oh, think about that. But also Abraham, on the way to the Akedah, on the way to the binding of Isaac,
He
leaves
leaves-
his servant.
servant there and goes off just with Isaac.
And it's the same word we discovered. It's not
Eved or
servant,
something.
it's boy.
Yeah, good. It's the same word. Okay, good. Okay. Bracha, keep going.
Okay. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush and sat down under it and prayed that he might die.
Okay, pause. Great. Ellen, yes.
Jonah.
Jonah, good. So
And Hagar.
I wish it was the same word. Jonah sits under a kikayon. This is a rotem. But yes, it's definitely Jonah who sits, because of two things. He's not only sitting under a bush, it's sitting under a bush and praying for his death. And there's actually one other person who
Hagar.
Hagar and Ishmael.
Good.
And-
Janet, yes.
And Moses tells God to take him, that he can't live anymore. At some point when the Israelites are complaining so much.
Yes. So that's also a very common motif, right? Prophets feeling like the burden of leadership and a prophecy is too great, and that they're both not up to it and that they can't go on.
Well,
So there are others who probably play on that frequency also. Okay, good. Bracha, you're doing a great job. Keep going.
Okay. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. He lay down and fell asleep under a broom bush. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat.
Okay, good.
He
Pause for 1
looked
sec.
about.
Janet, yeah, what did
Well, I was thinking, we were talking about Jacob who went to sleep.
yeah,
And he also interacted with angels.
Yeah, there's an angel at the bottom of the ladder or something who speaks to him.
Beautiful. So we've got, if you want to read it this way, you can say from an intertestamental midrash perspective, Elijah is already the new Abraham, the new Moses, the new Jacob, the new Jonah, right? You got a lot going on. Okay,
And
Bracha, keep going.
And Hagar. Don't forget Hagar.
And Hagar, I don't know exactly how that fits in, right? So I left her out. It doesn't prove the point very well, but yes.
Yeah, she's the stranger. She's used to it.
Or Ishmael, a new nation is created.
But also Hagar was not willingly in the desert looking to die. She was looking to save her son.
Oh yeah, but she sat down under a bush and suddenly an angel came, and it comes in the next sentence. An angel came and she saw the water.
Yeah. Maybe we could argue this illusion is to universalize, right? Because if Hagar is the mother of Hagar and Ishmael and the Arab peoples, and eventually it gets connected even to Islam. So maybe this is to universalize what's about to happen with Elijah. This is not just a Jewish or an Israelite narrative. This is a narrative like it goes back to kind of patriarchal, possibilities that spawn multiple nations and multiple religions. Okay, Bracha, keep going for us.
He looked about, and there beside his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water.
It's matzah.
I can't believe I never saw that before. Perfect. It's matzah.
And the offerings at the temple.
I also think there's something, I was going to look it up, but I didn't have time. There's something also in the King David narrative that's like this. When King David's hiding in the cave from Shaul, I think there are jars of water and cakes, but I could be wrong because I did not double check that one. Okay, keep going, Bracha.
He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second.
Oh, no, she froze.
Too
Okay,
much
so
for you.
so the angel came a second time. That's the binding of Isaac again also, right? The angel calling out to Abraham twice. There are other motifs that shows up in other kind of prophetic motifs as well. Okay, keep going, Bracha.
He rose and ate and drank, and with the strength from that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights as far as the mountain of God at Horeb.
Okay,
Well,
so
that's
everyone should
fun.
be falling out of their seats now, right? Ding, 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 ding. It's so obvious. So Ellen, take it, tell us.
Okay, it's Noah, it's Moshe, it's yeah.
The Israelites
And
wandering for
It's the 40 years in the desert.
Yeah.
Here's the desert.
It's the
40
mountain of
nights
God.
up on Mount Sinai, 40 days of flooding for Noah. Good. And what does 40 mean in the Bible? Does it
Lots.
A long time.
It means, so I don't mean to be like picayune about it, but I think what Bible scholars say is it means a good amount of time, right? It's not a full generation. It's not a long time. It's a good amount of time. It's not nothing, you might say. Okay.
Also, when Moses went up on the mountain, he didn't eat.
Yep. He was up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. And so here's the biggest thinger. What is Mount Horeb? What's another name for Mount
Sinai, Mount Sinai.
Right. So if you look in Deuteronomy and books that are considered redacted by the Deuteronomic redactor, the same redactor who did Deuteronomy, Mount Sinai is referred to as Horeb. So literally, if we're, the Tanakh here is trying to tell us we've got a new Moshe and we've got a new Mount Sinai, a new revelation is about to happen. I'm not just making this up. This isn't just 21st century Rabbi Mishigas. Going all the way back to the Sixth Rabati, the rabbis are very concerned with how closely associated this text is, seeming to contradict the revelation of Mount Sinai for Moses. And they go through this whole rhetorical thing trying to prove how Moses's revelation at Sinai is better and superior to Eliyahu's revelation at Horeb. But like, we're not the first people to make this connection. This is like, it's baked into the text. Okay, Bracha, keep going for us. Take us home.
There he went into the cave, and there he spent the night. Come out,
David,
God
King
called.
David,
Like King David, yes. And also Moshe, right? When Moshe
the cave.
wants to see God, Moshe hides in the cleft of the rock as God passes by.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, we made
And
that.
also, God has to tell Moshe to go down because the people are sinning, and not to spend so much time with God when the people are sinning.
Yeah.
And also Noah was called by God to come out of the ark. He wasn't so willing to do that.
Is it called out? Like that we should look up. If that's there, Bracha, in that way, like if it says something like Vayomer say, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Because that's, and so that means this is like it's not just another Sinai, there's a hint of another creation here. Right? This is like a new epoch in history that's about to begin with this revelation. Okay, bring us home.
Okay. And so let me see where I am. And stand on the mountain before the Lord. And so the Lord passed by. There was a great and mighty
Oops, you missed it.
of the Lord.
Okay,
That's Moshe.
So Ellen, how is it the coming out?
No, Moses is in the cleft of the rock and the Lord passed by.
Right. So there's more of Moshe. And then we get 3 images here of God, right, that are all rejected. The first image is that a wind. So where else is God depicted as wind?
At the Revelation.
At the Revelation of Mount Sinai?
Yeah.
How about Bereshit? Ruach Elohim Rachefet al Pnei Hamayim.
Great. So I think
Yeah.
So this is so important, right? The first image of God in the Torah it said before the world was created, the wind of God hovered above the water. Ruach Elohim Rachefet al Pnei Hamayim. right? And over the primordial waters that existed before the world was created. So think about this again, if you're trying to overturn everything that we're supposed to think about and know about God as Jews. So the first image of God in the Torah, God was not in the wind. But there's another one that's really important. Where else is God depicted as wind? It's a very famous, we often don't think about it as wind, but it's very important. It's very Pesach related.
The wind that parted the Sea of Reeds.
Yes. It was God's Ruach that came and allowed the children of Israel to pass through the Sea of Reeds. Beautiful. So the next image of God that comes is as an earthquake, right? But God's not in the earthquake. So what are depictions of God as an earthquake in the
Korach.
Korach, the most famous rebellion against God. It is Dafka. It is specifically an earthquake that opens up the earth that punishes the followers of Korach. And there are probably others, but there's one other one that's there.
When the whole Mount Sinai shakes.
Yeah, I think Mount Sinai is there's a lot of earthquake imagery there at Har Sinai. And then after the earthquake, we get fire.
The burning bush.
Thank you for seeing it, the burning bush. And
the pillar of fire. The pillar of fire that leads the children of Israel through the desert.
Yeah. It's really interesting. God descends in the longer version of this class. We actually look at all these different theophanies, all these different appearances of God. But in the book of Exodus, fiery clouds descend onto Mount Sinai. So that's fire. In Deuteronomy, it's a different image. God is really far away in Deuteronomy, but a Bible professor describes me as it was a fiery telephone cord. A fiery cord descends from heaven, and the children of Israel hear God's voice out of that fire at the bottom of Mount Sinai. And even within 1 Kings, there's this hilarious and amazing story of Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal to a sacrifice off. You guys know the story? I think it's really cursed, right? But it's like, the prophets of Baal are doing anything they can do. They're chanting, they're twirling, they're cutting themselves, and they can't get the fire to come down and consume the sacrifice. And Elijah walks up, and in my imagination, he walks up, incredibly nonchalant, pours water over the wood, builds a trough around, and it's like he doesn't even say a full bracha. It's just like baruch, and this huge thing of fire comes down and consumes the sacrifice. So this, I would say, if Ruach is the first depiction of God in the Tanakh, so fire is the quintessential, right?
Yeah, we end Yom Kippur services with that story.
Say that again.
What?
Say it one more time.
We end our Yom Kippur service with a line from that story.
Yeah, it's in Untitled Chapter. It says, is that what you're talking about? Where it says shofar?
I'm thinking the final line, isn't it? The final line, Hashem Hu Elohim.
Yeah.
The final line of the Yom Kippur service, as I know it at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what everybody shouts after that Elijah wins that.
Oh, right. Oh, I thought you were going to a different place, because in Untitled Chapter, there's an allusion to this where it says shofar gadol yitaka, a horn, a great horn is blown, or a great sound is blown from the horn. The kol d'mamad yishama, and a still small voice is heard. Right? But so I realized we're supposed to be finishing in about 5 minutes. I'm going to push us through a little bit to the punchline. But what's so amazing about this text is that it's totally blasphemous, right? It really is overturning the quintessential images, depictions, and metaphors of God that are quintessential to Jewish tradition. And what's also interesting is that wind, earthquake, and fire are all visual, they're auditory, they're external, right? But none of these things are really God. But where does Eliyahu find God? In this still small voice. And I've taught this a few times when I have time to ask folks. 85 to 87% of people normally assume that the still small voice is something internal. It's something you hear inside yourself, not externally. What an amazing thing that Jewish tradition develops, right? That we went from a God who was external and full of pyrotechnics and natural miracles and plagues, all of a sudden, God is something very quiet, almost hidden, something that maybe you don't hear in the earthquake, but you hear after the earthquake in the quiet. You ever have one of those moments where there's a car accident or an almost catastrophe, and there's this incredible holy silence that comes after it, right? That's where Eliyahu was finding God. Now, someone, Leora Klein, who was a student at Penn, said something beautiful once, was this was the God that Eliyahu needed, because don't forget, he's being chased. Everyone hates him at this point. The Israelites hate him. They've rejected his prophecy. His life is being threatened. He can't handle a God that has violence or external power. He needs a God that is simple and safe and gentle, right? But I think what's so powerful about it, right, is that if you were asked, what is the Tanakh trying to tell us the nature of God is, there is no answer. There are all of these answers, and there are dozens more. We could spend a semester looking at all of these different depictions. But I guess, like, what does it say if the quintessential documents that tell us what to believe in God has God that's totally external, powerful, pyrotechnic, and a God that's internal, quiet, and gentle? And I think it means that part of the shift here that I want to play with is that instead of thinking about God as an object, right? There's actually a term for this called objective theology. God is a thing or a being or a personified thing that exists outside of us that we can prove. That maybe there's a different process that the Tanakh is trying to teach us about how we discover what God is, and that God here is discovered through experience, not through belief, not through faith. Okay, I want to just push it a little bit further, and then I'm happy to stay a little bit longer if people want to push and play with this idea. But the idea that I'm trying to get us to is that there's something called predicate theology, which was developed by liberal Christian Protestant theologians and was brought into Jewish thought also by a number of different thinkers. But the idea here is that you can't describe God as something true, independent of our relationship with it. And that just like you wouldn't say to someone, do you believe your parents exist? Or do you believe your children exist? It's a weird question. You'd look at someone strangely because it's not about belief in your parents or your children. The reason they matter to you is because of experience. So the shift here would be to say, instead of asking, do you believe a thing called God exists? The shift would say, when in your life have you felt God, right? When have you experienced it? And what are the attributes and the characteristics of those experiences? And now I want to push, and I'm gonna get like a little bit radical here, what I would even go so far as to say, so sorry, let me plug it in one or two more times. So if you look on the second page of his source sheet, there's this beautiful text by Rav Kook, where he says, that it's necessary to show us how we can enter the palace. The palace is a living relationship with God. And that you enter the living relationship with God not through belief, but through a gateway. And what are the gateways that Rav Kook talks about? It's an unbelievable text. The gateways to experiencing God as disclosed in the world are natural beauty, like you guys said, right? Grandeur is manifest in every living thing, in every insect, in every blooming plant and flower, this is an amazing thing Rav Kook is saying, in every nation state, right? In politics, God can be revealed. In the sea with its turbulent waves and the panorama of the skies, in the talents of creatures, right? So I realize we're at time here. If we could leave the room open a little bit longer, that'd be great. But what I want to do is just maybe give the final twist here, and then if people want to hang out and talk a little bit more. What I think this could mean when we're having to push a little faster than I would want. But if we're trying to read the Haggadah or something in the Torah or the Siddur to make sense, rather than asking ourselves, do we believe in it? The flip that we could make is that the purpose of these texts are meant to communicate not an objective truth, but an experience our ancestors had, or maybe poetically an experience the text is trying to get us to have. So for example, it's not whether literally God brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand and outstretched arm, right? But what do we learn about our lives if we believe that we were taken out of slavery? That against the most unimaginable odds, against the most powerful empire in the world, against all of that, we were able to achieve something that was impossible to imagine, right? What does that mean for our lives today? And so that's the flip. Instead of it describing God, these texts are meant to evoke an experience of God. And I think the same thing could be said for let's say Yom Kippur, right? Instead of literally believing that God is in the sky writing a book of names, you get in the book, you're going to have a good year. If you don't get in the book, you're going to have a bad year. Here, the idea becomes, what do you learn about your life by acting as if your life depends on the decisions you make right now, right? You get to have a simulated mortality crisis to realign your values every year. So this is like one of the ways, and I don't think I'm bringing you some new age touchy-feely theology. I think this is baked deeply into Jewish tradition, and we could look at Maimonides and other folks going way back, but that these texts are not meant to be descriptive of something that we then ask whether we believe in. It's a poetic device to get us back to the experience that our ancestors had, so that we can learn the spiritual, ethical, communal values that emerge out of these experiences. And that could be reenacting going from a kind of slavery to freedom. And we do that, right? We're enslaved to technology, we're enslaved to fear, we're enslaved to our own political views, we're enslaved to narratives in our head that make it hard to love the people in our family. There are countless metaphorical things that we are enslaved to that are just as powerful as Pharaoh was, and that we need to be freed from. So I actually think that this is not sacrilege to overturn this like the Eliyahu story does, but it actually is the beginning of having really deep ownership over what these ritual texts and holidays can mean for us this year, and I think for every year in our lives.
I think it gives us hope also.
So if people want to hop off, I won't be offended, but if you want to schmooze and ask questions, we can stay a little bit longer. But say, how does it give us hope? I love that idea.
Well, if you think of the creation of the state of Israel after the Holocaust, just think of that.
Right.
No,
It's not in line with a historical progression. It's a total break.
correct.
Something like that happened.
I have a question.
Yeah, Lori.
I'm going to be leading my family Seder, and there is some interfaith marriage. They're very assimilated Jews. A couple of teenage kids from the interfaith marriage. How can I very simply incorporate what you are teaching to ask this question of them and get a good discussion started?
Yeah. So the way that I would often get into something like this is to like ask people to think of lyrics from a love song. And in like, your kisses are sweeter than wine, right? Like kisses don't taste like wine. Kisses aren't sweet. I'm not even sure wine is sweet, right? Like what's going on? It's not a description of a kiss. Love songs are meant to evoke the feelings of falling in love. Or the other metaphor I sometimes use, it's very easy. Have you ever been like at the most amazing, beautiful sunset you could ever imagine, and you take a picture of it, and then you show it to someone, and they're like, yeah, it's a sunset. And you're like, no, but it was like, it's the ocean, and there was a rainbow and the star, and they're like, yeah, that's a sunset. And like, what if you wanted to actually communicate the power of that sunset? It's not a photograph that does it, because a photograph is too literal. There's too much information in it. What might work better is like an impressionist painting. And I think the same thing goes with a text, right? Like a Haggadah text. So the question then you can flip and say, like, if the purpose of the text is not to literally believe that God cast plagues, or literally to believe that God has an arm and a hand that brought us out of Egypt, just like we're not literally supposed to believe that kisses taste like wine. So what could it be trying to evoke? If we read this as a love song, as opposed to a history book, what could it be trying to teach us? What feeling could it be trying to get us to? That's usually how I play that.
Thank you.
Mindy, yeah, go ahead.
There's some of course, you know, as much as you can go with one interpretation, you can think others, like the Rav Kook's image of the gate. You know, there's the midrash about the gates of Jerusalem and seeing the poorest man and finding that being Elijah or the Mashiach, and also the, you know, as much as you celebrate freedom from the Egyptians, you know, there's the question of, was it necessary to kill all the firstborn and to be as destructive as the plagues were?
Right. But I think again, when you do this flip from do I believe to what does this evoke, it gives you a freedom to understand that what you think and believe doesn't make you a bad Jew or a watered down Jew. Like, here's a biblical text that's throwing out everything that is sacred that came before it for a new metaphor of God. But in other words, like, how do we play with this? We're like, if we don't believe that these plagues literally happened, but they're metaphorical, so what does that mean? Is this a revenge fantasy that the Israelites are having after coming out of Egypt? And like, do we have revenge fantasies in our own life? Like, were there revenge fantasies that came up during the election?
Yes.
And like, you know, my in-laws are both therapists, and this always comes up at Seder about like Shvo Chamadcha, this prayer where you're praying for God to pour out God's wrath upon the nations. And like their theory as therapists, and my father-in-law who passed away, but as a Freudian, thinks that the most healthy thing to do is to confront your revenge fantasies, because it's the people who aren't in touch with those hidden revenge fantasies that actually get into trouble, right? Like I remember when we had our first child, they said to us, like, many parents have weird fantasies that go through their mind about like flushing their kids down the toilet or leaving them outside on the front stoop, right? And that is natural. And the parents who actually, people who like really act on that stuff are the ones who are so repressed they can't like acknowledge that feeling, forgive themselves, and move on. So maybe the 10 plagues are about like, where do we have revenge fantasies in the world today? Or like, how do revenge fantasies fit into the racial tensions that exist in America today? You know, Quentin Tarantino did Jewish revenge fantasies around the Holocaust with Inglourious Bastards. And then he did kind of Black revenge fantasies with Django Unchained, right? This is like a deeply human thing. So the truth of these stories perhaps is not in their factual truth, but in their human truth. That if you had been enslaved for 400 years and got out,
5 o'clock.
wouldn't you have all these deep-seated magical revenge fantasies that you'd want to imagine for them? Or another way to play with this, right? Maybe they're all just natural disasters. It had nothing to do with God. They're things related to the Nile River or to flooding. Many of these things can, you know, often were rationalized that way. But imagine if something happened in your life today that was unimaginable. It was so far outside the bounds of what you imagined for your future, and it happened in a beautiful way. You might start to see all of these things in your life leading up to it as signs. And maybe that's what the children of Israel were doing. These things that really could have been related to flooding, all of a sudden it was God's hand. But that's a powerful moment in Jewish history when we went from seeing ourselves as alone in whatever suffering and narrowness we were struggling with to being in a moment where something must have helped us move from slavery to freedom against the most powerful empire in the world. And if they could do it then, if God could help the Israelites do it then, what does it mean for whatever we're enslaved to today? Or for anyone in our society who is enslaved, right? Metaphorically. So limitless possibilities start to emerge. So listen, I want to just thank you all. It's so fun to learn with you today. I wish you a Chag Sameach, a really joyous, healthy holiday. And I hope that you find ways to both inspire and annoy everybody involved in this. On and on and on with new interpretations, making the holidays and the text come alive in new ways that inspire new insights. I hope you have a very safe and healthy year. Chag Sameach.